Jake Arrieta goes back to the Cubs, so he goes back to a former club, one-year deal, $6.5 million. Thoughts, first of all, on Arrieta being a productive pitcher again? Is that still a good possibility or a remote possibility?
No, I think he can be a solid contributor. I'm fascinated. I want to ask Danny this. I mean, to me, he's been a guy that's, because he's been a power pitcher, got caught in between. It's not a command and control guy, BK. It's more of a movement guy, late action on the plate. I'd like to see him turn into more of a sinker ball guy, a true power sinker guy that stays down consistently in the zone in a game that believes in four-seamers up. I think he can have some more percentage. Saying that, he's got to go from like a 51% ground ball rate up to a 58, 60% ground ball rate. So he really has to commit to that, and I'm not sure that they'll do that or that's in the Cubs pitching plan for him.
Dan, I'm in a minority when it comes to this. I think there's a place that down in the strike zone necessarily now with the launch angle that go and be able to get that ball and hit out of the ballpark. But when you have the kind of movement that Jake Arrieta has, the sinker is going to come back and play. And I really think that we're going to see some pitchers realize that, listen, you want to get swings and misses, and we're so enamored with the strikeouts and the batting average and everything. But you are what you are. And I think if Jake Arrieta can figure out how to blend in, he still has a good curveball. He has that big kind of a slurve. It's not a true slider. He has a changeup that he throws. If he can find a lane and get comfortable throwing the ball down in the zone and then using that four-seamer, riding it up in the zone when he's able to get two strikes, I still think there's some good baseball left in Jake Arrieta. I do.
I don't know if there's impact there, but I think solid contribution is there.
You know what fascinates me about Arrieta? This has gotten my attention all morning when I was thinking about it. How many guys in the history of the game have been like him? Meaning, for 1 year, Jake Arrieta, and when he went to the wild card game, it was you have to put yourself in that time and place. For that 1 year and that one time and place, he was the #1 pitcher in the sport. #1, and that was a year Zach Greinke had another monster year. He had like a 1.77 ERA for 230 innings, and we came up with it. Our research staff came up with it. Mike Scott, 1986. About the only time when a guy was unhittable. And Dan, back me up on this. When that classic Astros-Mets League Championship Series, they were in Game 6, the epic Game 6, and the Mets knew if we have to go to a Game 7 and face that guy, Mike Scott, 2.22 ERA, 275 innings, we're losing. We're not going to the World Series. We are losing, and we have no shot. It was happening at that time.
You are 100% correct. And as great as that 86 Mets team was, there was no chance. I wouldn't say no chance, but if you went through that locker room, they wanted no part of Mike Scott in game. Their Game 7 was Game 6. They felt like if they didn't win Game 6, they were up against it.
Mike Scott that year had 2 complete games in that LCS, had given up 1 run. No, the thought was, and the Mets were the most cocksure team in the history of the game, the 86 Mets. And yet they're like, oh, no, we're not beating that guy for 1 year. And I'm not saying they're one-hit wonder, because there was some good. Arrieta had some decent years around it. Mike Scott had some decent years around it. But even like I thought, Dan, Vida Blue had a couple of good seasons besides that. But how many guys hit the mountaintop where you're Sandy Koufax at his peak, and then the rest of your career just isn't Hall of Fame? It's rare, and better to have it than not have it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it gets back to deliveries, sustainable health, pitch mix. Jake Arrieta and Mike Scott, for me, Danny, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, were never like pinpoint command and control guys. They never relied so much on interrupting a hitter's rhythm. It was pure movement, power, attack the strike zone, catcher set up in the middle of the plate. Here it comes, try to hit it. The sustainability for those type of pitchers historically in our game is not great, but when they're good, and when they're on top of their game, they are unhittable.
I'll give you a comp today. Kevin Gausman is a guy that's similar to Mike Scott and Jake Arrieta. When he's on, he has that power turbo sinking fastball, good hard breaking ball. But the problem is, it's being in the strike zone enough. And Dan, you touched on it with Jake Arrieta. You look at that, I'd say 250 to 280 inning window with the Cubs, Brian. You look at his number, he was the best pitcher in baseball. Yeah. But I think a lot of that span of that 280 innings, his pitch selection and the quality of his pitches was so good that he could afford, the catcher could set in and the ball would run away. David Ross, who's going to manage him, caught one of his no-hitters. His movement was incredible, Brian, but the kind of movement that it's hard to control that unless you're Greg Maddux, that kind of movement.
The only guys that I can think of that were, because I'm fascinated by this, the historical sense of it. When you're going into a decisive game in the playoffs and you're like, no, we're not beating this guy. Oral Hershiser and then Justin Verlander against the A's back-to-back years. But it's rare that you're like, if we have to go face that guy, we just can't beat this guy.
He was
I mean, it's a short window, but man, that's something.
He was that good.